Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with the Remaster Preview. I know it's a couple days late considering the preview was done on Saturday, and of course, this is not coming out, immediately on time. I had a prior commitment on Saturday, and, had to get all my information straightforward today, so I'm going to be releasing it on Monday when I can release a better reviewed, I feel like, video. So, Remaster Preview. What was announced at Gen Con, if anything, that maybe we didn't know about? Nothing. Most of what was in the Remaster Preview was stuff that has been already pretty well spoken about up until this point. That doesn't mean that there wasn't interesting information to give or that there wasn't anything to gain from watching it. It's just, it was nothing spectacular as far as what the remaster was really bringing. It was nothing like the Starfinder 2E news like we got in the initial keynote, which was pretty hype, and you might start seeing some more Starfinder content here on the channel when we get closer to that remaster, which, or not remaster, but the second edition, which will be in about 2 years, give or take. The playtest will be coming out next summer, I think next August. So we got some time before that, but maybe something for the future of the channel, who knows? So let's just go over some of the slides I found that I think there's some really interesting information that, can give us a little bit of a sneak peek of what we can expect. First of all, the ancestries. They've changed the ancestries, and this page for it is pretty clean. They've added the Leshy and the Orcs as standard races now, which are ancestries now, which is pretty cool. And overall, it's pretty good, and they're going to be releasing a lot of the other ancestries in the Player Core 2 coming out sometime next year. But for this year, we have this nice page, and check out the Nephilim, and they even did a specific page on the Nephilim that you can see here. The Nephilim art I do like a lot better. I do like how they differentiated, and most of what they talked about when it came to the Nephilim is that there were just a lot of feats that the ASMR and the Tiefling shared that were only different by descriptive terms, but were not mechanically different. So overall, it actually saves a lot of space by combining them, and as well as the Ganzi and whatever other alignment-based divine style ancestry into the Nephilim. And I think the Nephilim is just a very cool idea, and I don't have any problem with them doing it this way. In fact, I think it allows for a lot more expression, because now you can have any kind of divine entities from any plane that might come out, or any like dimension within a plane like the heavens. So I think this is going to be a really good choice, and like I said, the Nephilim art is pretty cool. Next, I talked a bit about Cleric, and as you can see here, a little bit of the new like design. I do like how it feels like they're consolidating a lot of the information a lot better on these pages, and Cleric got a slight buff. I don't know if it's the buff everyone wanted, to be honest, because more or less now, if you're a war priest, you can see here, you actually do get master proficiency in martial weapons and your spell DCs and everything at level 19, which is a little late in the game, but you get it now. So all those people who are rating classes based on level 20 have less to complain about. But you're still a war priest. In the end, you're still a full caster, even if you're not benefiting from the full spell DCs that like true casters are. War Priest, I think, is going to fit in a lot better. And they also mentioned during the remaster as well that they're going to have like access to feats that allow them to wear heavy armor within their class, and obviously be able to scale like that without needing to go into an archetype. So they definitely understand what people want with War Priest, and to the best of their ability, while maintaining the game's balance, War Priest, I feel like, is getting what they've been asking for. They are now going to be as good as other marshals eventually, like 4 levels after everyone, but eventually they do get up to master. What more could you ask for? They're still full casters, so they still can't be 100% martial characters, but I mean, now they're pretty much like Magus, which is pretty cool. just a little bit delayed in level from when they get some things, but pretty good. I do wish that they allowed War Priests to get a better proficiency in their defenses, because overall, if you're going to be a frontline cleric, your objective is probably to be like a tank of some kind. You get shield block and all that. I just wish their defensive proficiency was like a bit better, or scaled a bit better anyway. Next, they started speaking on the Witch, and the Witch is getting a pretty big overhaul. I wouldn't say it's a complete class rework, as it operates a lot the same as it did before with some minor differences. They've reskinned a lot of the patrons and added a lot more flair and flavor to them. As well, they've added some new features to your familiar. So now witches will have the utmost like familiar in the game. It's the best familiar in the game, purely for the fact that whenever a witch uses a hex or sustain a hex, the familiar does something additional. Plus, they have access to unique feats, which we'll go over to this next page on, where the familiar will actually be able to get some unique abilities that you can use, kind of like additional spells per day. I actually really like the idea of the witch being the class that kind of gets extra spells from their patron. It's just like it's the extra boon, the extra gift. So essentially, witches have a lot of feats that give them equivalently extra spell slots, which is really cool. Granted, you can't put any spell in it, but an additional spell is really nice. I've actually been playing Baldur's Gate 3 a lot, and they've changed the automation to make it feel really, really good. I'm playing a Warlock, and I'm not playing a Bladelock, as I've never been a Bladelock fan in the first place, but I've been playing the Pact of the Chain, and legitimately, I've been having a really good time. And I think a good portion of that is due to the way you can get extra spells in Baldur's Gate 3 to add on to your character. And Pathfinder does that really well with a lot of things, but now Witch is getting some unique abilities centered around that. Also, a lot of their weird, kind of strange feats that didn't really fit how the class worked have been designed. Unfortunately, they don't have it here on the splash page, but the witch has a witch's armaments, which is replacing the hair and nails. And when you successfully strike with them, you make it easier for enemies to fail your hexes, which I didn't think they had saves for hexes before. So I don't know exactly what that means. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a witch nerf for sure. I just think that there's something interesting about the making it easier to fail hexes, which who knows. But regardless, I think the witch is going to do really, really well moving forward from this, and I don't think many people have the reasons to complain that they did for before for which just felt like a different kind of wizard, but a little bit worse, if you know what I mean. So now witches feel just generally better, more unique. They're familiar and their patron, both adding a lot more zest to the witch, which is something that a lot of people have been very, very excited for, me especially, as I feel like witch definitely needed some kind of like a facelift to make it just stand out in the crowd. Now, the big one. So first of all, I'm going to say, if you watched my prior video on did they nerf wizards, I think there was a big misconception in how that video was used, and that mostly just comes from spell schools being a feature of the wizard class, and also spell schools being a category for spells, So a lot of times in that video, when I was saying spell schools, I was talking about the categories of spells and not about the wizard spell schools that they get as a, class feature, essentially. So now they've been changed to curriculum, which I think is a good idea. I like curriculum. I enjoy the idea of curriculum. My critique from the video was that by removing the categories of types of spells, it removed player aid and GM aid when it came to making decisions onto what went in. And in fact, talking during the remaster preview here, they were talking about how a lot of these curriculums, these schools, are remixes. They have elements of like two of the schools kind of mixed in. Like battle magic was evocation and abjuration, which makes a lot of sense. A battle mage would do something like that, and so would kind of mix in those kind of spells. Now, my critique was that by removing the schools, you remove an element that would have just made it easier. You could have just made, here's the war school, here are the spells that, we have, but you can choose a spell from either evocation, abjuration, or one that you find most appropriate to the theme based on the GM's discretion. That made adding spells to the list, that would make it just easier. I don't know how anyone could complain about that. That would just be easier as an additional level of category without needing wizards to have, like, curriculums and categories of spell schools could exist in the same system. I don't know why they couldn't, but regardless of that, I like curriculums. I think they're good. And honestly, if I'm being quite frank here, the additional spell slot that wizards get, which makes them, the casters of the game, the big premier casters, I don't think there's anything wrong with their additional spell slot being restrained in a sense to a specific list. Is it a nerf? No, because the book says that you can literally pick whatever is most appropriate for your spell school. But if you look at it just raw, like on the page without any extra like deliberation, your GM just says, no, just pick what's in the book. I don't want to deal with it. I think that's fine because literally every other class in the game that gives you additional spells to your list already does this. So I don't know why wizards need to get all the extra love, and that was kind of a lot of the complaints that Mark Seifter was talking about on Roll for Combat as well, was wizards just felt like a very greedy class in general. So having something like this is obviously less restricting as far as design space is concerned. And I agree with that. I like curriculums. I like the idea of curriculums. And I do like the idea that they mentioned during the preview, which is now that they don't have spell schools for wizards, not categories, but I guess categories as well, they can now add in future books new curriculums that have new spell focuses, more or less. So in future books, they can add more when before they were limited to just the 8. They couldn't do anything in any of the books if they ever felt like it. Is that such a big bonus? I don't know. Not really, honestly speaking, just because all the spell schools are essentially remixed into the curriculums already. So you would just be picking from, it would just be theming, really. But that is important for, character design. So I do think it's a good idea, and I do like curriculums overall. Don't get it twisted. I just would have preferred if they kept the categories of spell schools. Obviously, for legal reasons, they really couldn't, because even if they renamed them, it was still the same 8 schools just renamed. And so they needed to have a little, or maybe need is not the best way, but they wanted to have more, plausible like differences between the Dragon game and Pathfinder. So I understand, but I would have preferred the kept categories just because there's so many ways it just makes the game easier, in my opinion. But that's the thing, it's my opinion. You don't have to listen to it. Regardless, curriculums, cool. I like how they work, and I think they're just going to give wizards a lot more flavor. And they even tied specific schools in Galarian to the individual curriculum, which I think is also a brilliant way and can add narrative to your character. Overall, curriculums are a much more flavorful and impactful for that reason choice over the old wizard spell schools, the class function, which you can understand why now when I said spell schools and people were getting it confused. It was just a whole thing. But anyway, there's a lot more to the video. Now, they actually did go over the spells, and I'm not going to necessarily dedicate a lot of this video to it, as most of the spells that were reworked in a sense, not reworked, a lot of them were just renamed so that, again, legal definition from D&D to this game, they just needed to, a lot of iconic spells. But they did take the opportunity to change some spells. They did mention that a lot of the cleansing spells are now kind of bigger buckets that had similar types of afflictions. So now you don't need to necessarily prepare 5 different types or 5 different spells to get for every type of affliction. Now it's like 2, which is pretty understandable and pretty feasible. Granted, I don't like it still, and this might be a thing for another video, but I'll make it short. I don't like counteract type spells. because in order for the spell to be relevant for the level that you're at, you need to prepare them at a spell level close to your max spell level to make it so that they can counteract challenges that you're currently facing. Because if you don't know, for counteracting, if you succeed, you can do up to one level over the level of the spell for the counteract level. And if you fail, or no, I think it's if you fail, it can be one up over. Or no, if you fail, it's anything below your level. If you succeed, it's one over, and if it's a crit success, it's four over. I've been trying to do this with my Magus just to have like a spell to just in case, you know. And it's like, oh well, because I didn't prepare this, or I got a wand of like dispel magic, right? Well, it doesn't do anything because we've out leveled that spell level, and it makes low level spell slots less valuable because that's kind of what they did in games before. Is you could prepare a very useful utility spell at your lower levels and keep your high levels for damage spells. That didn't change. You still need to maintain high level cleansing spells for appropriate level challenges, which I don't like. But anyway, not a big deal. Just my little gripe I wanted to throw in there. Regardless, they made it easier so now you can cleanse afflictions in the game much more easy, which I think is good. Also, huge news. They've added a runic weapon and runic body, which allows you, which is essentially mage armor and magic weapon. They've been reworked, and now they scale with the game. Now, obviously, the way they scale, it allows you to give the level appropriate enchantments at the level at which you normally would get it. So you don't get the +3 major striking until level 17, which you probably might already have one at that point. It's really hard to say. I mean, even in our late game, like some of our weapons are all the way maxed out. We're level 20 now, but not all of them. So a spell like this actually does have some benefit. Granted, it's that kind of utility slot thing of you can use a +3 major striking weapon with one of your 9th level spell slots, which you probably want to do something like summon a legion of dragons or whatever. But you know, it makes sense heightening it this way. I wish it was more like a focus spell or something. I would feel like that would work a lot better. Regardless, I do like the change, and it makes those spells no longer useless after level 3. So, you know, overall, a boon to the game. So beyond the core one, they also talked about the GM core, and while I'm not going to go too much into the GM core itself, I will state some interesting things. They've actually added the lore to the GM core, which I think is very, very interesting. Something that I agree with, honestly. The player core is much more focused on what the players need to know, and the GM core is much more focused on what the GM needs to know, obviously. But it's something that I think is good. And another very interesting change is they actually moved the items from GM core, not the general items, but the GM core, the magic items, you know, held items or worn items. They moved those to the GM core, as it makes sense. The GM is the one who puts those in the game, and just having a book with all the information that the GM needs in one book is good, rather than the GM needing to constantly switch from the player core to the GM core for something like items, which is very much a GM like determined thing in the game. So I actually think this is a really good idea. And I'm going to also mention the GM subsystems page, which I actually love because this very much fixes one of the major problems with, honestly, both their books before, and I didn't really talk about before, but GM core, or the player core, is also getting a much needed facelift. It's a lot easier to find information. GM core is making it easier. Look at how the subsystem page is laid out. Now you know all the subsystems. You got the page numbers here. You can see it on the right hand corner of the right side of the page. That everything you need is pretty much there, which I think was very sorely needed. And this is just the kind of stuff that is going to make using the physical books very, very easy, which I think is only a good thing. Oh, and I did forget to mention as well, but they did mention kind of crafting. They're now making a slight change where if you own the formula to a particular item that you're making, you can reduce the setup time down to 1 day. They've already reduced it down to 2 days, but now you can reduce it down to 1 day. And honestly, this is something that just only makes sense. The problem with crafting before was that it felt like you didn't get anything out of it. You would have to spend 4 days to craft something for a price you would buy it at a store. Now, sometimes this is necessary because sometimes you don't have access to the item. Maybe you're just near a village that's just not going to have, level 12 items, for instance. But still, it felt bad to the players, and the players were very much not motivated to get any benefit out of crafting. Now, with this reducing of the setup time, yeah, you can get an item you need in like a day for the full price, or 2 days maybe. But now you also can just work on it for extra days a little bit easier. Yeah, sure, maybe it would take a very long time to get items down to the half price what you would get them before, but this just makes it easier. And again, crafting is incredibly powerful. For people who didn't play first edition, you probably don't know, but any game that has relevant item crafting, we're not talking about D&D's item crafting, which is garbage, but if you're talking about any game that actually had a good crafting system, it's very powerful and it breaks the game real easy. I felt like the balance was already fine, but I do think this change actually just makes it easier for crafters to at least get something. Now, if you're spending actually the 4 days that you were before, you're actually getting a reduction in price, which I think is kind of the point, honestly, in the end. So overall, I think that the items and the remaster overall is good. The player core is just going to be very helpful. It's got only stuff that the players are going to look at. And the GM core, I feel like, is just easier for the GMs to find what they're looking for. And with the shuffling of things, moving it out of the big core book to the GM book, it makes the GM book a bit more substantial. And it makes the core book less daunting, as the book was like this thick before. And yeah, so that's pretty much everything on the remaster and my general opinions, with some extra tirades on the side, as a garnish for the video. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and yeah. Do me a favor, at least like the video if you like this kind of content, and subscribe if you want to see more, as I'm going to be covering a lot more of the stuff going on. The next few months are going to be huge for Paizo, as we're getting the Qian Xiao book and also the remaster that's coming out. And I've been doing a lot of good work on the channel. A lot of people have been recognizing the channel more and more. And we've hit 3K. I'm not going to do a 3K special or anything like that. 2K was substantial because it doubled the initial hurdle I had to go through. And I might do something at 5K, but I'll probably not do anything till 10K. Regardless, 3K already, and we're actually getting more and more subs by the day. So I expect we're going to hit about 5K by the end of the year, which is very, very exciting. So if you want to be a part of this very fast-growing channel, go ahead and click that little button down below. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.